Hello and welcome back to our next video of Let's Talk, where we cover Kentucky's counties that were named for Revolutionary War Patriots in celebration of America's 250th birthday. So we had already previously covered Lincoln, Fayette, and Jefferson, and last week we covered Nelson. This week we're going to cover Mercer, and next week we'll cover Madison. And for those who may not have seen my videos, or for those who may have forgotten, we'll do a quick review in that the fact that in 1782, Virginia passed a law creating the District of Kentucky. Because remember, in 1782, we are still pre-statehood. So Kentucky is still a part of Virginia. But in 1782, Virginia passes the law creating the District of Kentucky. This actually allows Kentuckians to create their own court districts, which allows them to create their own counties, and they don't have to go to Virginia for that approval. So in 1785, it's the first time that Kentuckians actually create their own county for themselves, and they create Nelson County. Then in 1786, they create three more counties, the counties of Mercer, Bourbon, and Madison. So again, I said we're going to talk about Mercer this week. We're going to talk about Madison next week. And Bourbon, we're going to just talk about Bourbon briefly, simply because Bourbon was actually named not for an individual, but instead for the French royal house of Bourbon. Now, that's about as best as I can do with my non-existent French accent. So, Bourbon County was named for the French royal house. Now, why did we choose to do that in 1786? The reason was that we wanted to give thanks to the French for all of the help that they had given us during the Revolutionary War. So if you remember when we were talking about Lafayette, we talked about he was from France and he brought troops with him, and then just shortly thereafter, the French brought over their ships. Rochambeau came over, so they brought a lot of military help as well as financial help, which in turn led us to our victory with the Revolutionary War. We may not have been so lucky had it not been for the French. So Kentuckians wanted to give thanks to the French for that, so they named the county Bourbon after the family. Now, as a little bit of extra little information there, Paris, Kentucky, which is the county seat of Bourbon County, Paris was actually named for Paris, France. So again, it was another thank you to the French. Kind of like you name your children after people who are so important to you. So here we were naming our counties and our cities after places and the family from France. Now, in 1786, this is actually what our Kentucky map looked like. So I'll give you just a minute to take a look at that. And of course, this continues to get broken down as we continue on. So today we are focusing on Mercer County, and Mercer County was actually named for Brigadier General Hugh Mercer. Now, Hugh Mercer is not very well known, although I think that he should be. He and Lafayette were the only two up to this point that we've talked about that were not American-born patriots. Lafayette obviously was from France. Hugh Mercer was from Scotland. Now, all of the others that we have spoken about so far, they were American-born patriots. Their families had come into America, some of them as early as 1650s. So they had been on the land for quite a while. Mercer, born in Scotland in 1726. He was born to William and Anne Monroe Mercer. He actually stayed in Scotland for quite a while because he actually earned his medical degree there at the University of Aberdeen. He then, still in Scotland, took up arms on behalf of the Stuart in their claim to the English throne. He was there at the Battle of Culloden, in 1746. Now, I don't know Scottish history, but I have heard of that battle. But so he was there at that battle as they were fighting for the Stuarts to take claim of the English throne. Apparently, that battle did not go so well for Hugh Mercer. He fled to America after that battle, which is what gets him here to the United States, or what would become the United States. So, upon arrival to the colonies, he establishes a practice in Philadelphia and begins as a surgeon. All right, so he establishes a medical practice in Philadelphia as a surgeon. Now, the French and Indian War comes along, and I think that Hugh Mercer might have had a rebellious side. And I just say that because, he ends up in the Battle of Culloden. Here he is now joining the French and Indian War. He fought with the 1st Pennsylvania, and he became the first commandant of Fort Pitt. And Fort Pitt is in present, or would become present day, Pittsburgh. So he is beginning to make a name for himself as he participates in the French and Indian War. And it is actually there that he is introduced to George Washington. And they actually end up becoming, I don't know necessarily friends, but they at least know one another. So Mercer quits the militia in Pennsylvania, and he actually moves himself to Fredericksburg, Virginia in 1760. And once he is there, he again sets up shop. He sets up a medical practice and an apothecary shop there in Fredericksburg. And he actually goes on to marry Isabella Gordon, who was the daughter of a prominent tavern owner named John Gordon. He and Isabella go on to have 5 children together, and that's actually in a pretty short period of time, because again, we're in 1760 now. I'm not sure when they marry, but it is shortly after that. By the mid 1770s, Hugh is actually doing extremely well with his medical practice and being a surgeon, that he ends up being one of the largest landowners in Fredericksburg, Virginia, owning over 12,000 acres. So he's rising in the military world. He's rising in the social world, and he's very active in his church there in Fredericksburg, and he's very active in Masonic Lodge number 4. Masonic Lodge number 4 is one of the oldest lodges in the U.S., and as members of that lodge are George Washington. So again, he gets to hobnob with some of the big names. So he's hanging out with George Washington at Masonic Lodge. He's hanging out with George Whedon, and that name may not be a big deal, but he's actually pretty significant to this story. He's Mercer's brother-in-law. So George Whedon is a member of the lodge, as well as Washington's brother-in-law, Fielding Lewis. They were all members of this Masonic Lodge, so I think that it was the place to be in Fredericksburg. Now, we are on the edge of the Revolutionary War. In January of 1775, Mercer and Whedon, his brother-in-law, George Whedon, actually leave together and they join the 3rd Virginia Regiment. So again, here he is jumping into the battles. I just think he just had a little bit of a rebellious side. But it actually works in our favor. He gets appointed to colonel with George Whedon, his brother-in-law, as his second in command. They actually command James Monroe and John Marshall, the Chief Justice, or the future Chief Justice. Those 2 gentlemen are actually under the command of Colonel Mercer. Now, not too much more time passes, and General George Washington actually personally requests from Mercer to have a promotion to Brigadier General in June of 1776. So just a few months later after joining and becoming the colonel of the Virginia Regiment. So he's now Brigadier General, And we now come to the ending story of Hugh Mercer. On January 3rd of 1777, Mercer leads a brigade into battle at the Battle of Princeton, which is under General George Washington's command. So General George Washington's command, and then Hugh Mercer as Brigadier General, he is there with his brigade at the Battle of Princeton. Now, during this battle, unfortunately, Mercer's horse is shot out from underneath him, which causes him to fall, and then the British just attack. And Mercer, sadly, is hit in the head, and I think it was more than just a hit. And he actually was bayoneted 7 times. So he was basically stabbed 7 times with the bayonet. Okay. How he survived it off of the battlefield, I do not know. But he did. He did not die on the battlefield, which I would have thought he would have. He was actually taken to Thomas Clark's house, which was on the eastern end of the battlefield. And I imagine that the next few days were torturous. He actually lived 9 more days after being attacked and being stabbed 7 times. And it's more than just stab, right? It's a bayonet. So anyway, he survives for 9 more days. He must have been in complete pain and torture, and I just can't even imagine. He is attended by Benjamin Rush, who ends up becoming a fairly famous medical practitioner. But that doesn't, obviously, it's not going to do any good. And 1777, what are they going to do to help him? He dies 9 days later on January 12th, 1777. Now, George Whedon, remember that name I told you about? This is his brother-in-law. George Whedon ends up overseeing Mercer's estate. He takes in his widow and his 5 children, and he actually cares for and raises the children as his own, providing them education and all necessities. I suspect they were pretty well taken care of. Mercer himself was buried in Christ Church Burial Grounds in Philadelphia. For reasons I don't know, in 1840, they actually moved his body into the Laurel Hill Cemetery, which was also in Philadelphia. So he is now laid to rest at Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia. Now, I will end our story by saying that Mercer did not die in vain. Thank goodness. The Battle of Princeton ended up actually being a victory for George Washington and the Continental Army. And it was also a pretty significant turning point in that this amateur army that George Washington had could actually defeat the British. So it was a pivotal turning point pretty much in their morale, their camaraderie, their motivation, their momentum, and it allowed them to continue on and to believe in themselves. And so that actually kind of catapulted us into the victory of the Revolutionary War. So it was a significant battle. And while Mercer lost his life there, the battle itself was not in vain. Now, while we may not really remember General Hugh Mercer very well, we did name a county after him. At least we knew him in 1786. He is memorialized in other ways. A very famous painting was done by John Trumbull called The Death of General Mercer. So you may now see that painting and know what that's in reference to. And then also in 1906, the U.S. government erected a monument, a bronze statue dedicated to Hugh Mercer and his I don't even know what the word is I want to use. And his life, dedicated to his life and his service. There's the word I'm looking for. Sometimes being older than 50 just really messes with your brain. he dedicated to him and his service. It is located on Washington Avenue in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Also in Virginia is an apothecary shop museum. It's actually in Fredericksburg. It is actually named after him. It is the Hugh Mercer Apothecary Shop Museum in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And you can actually learn about Hugh Mercer and his time and his life and his service. You can learn more about this Scottish born American patriot there in Fredericksburg. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the story of Hugh Mercer. And I thank you so very much for joining me today. As you know, we will continue with videos as long as you continue to like them. So please make sure that you subscribe on my YouTube channel, that you follow on Facebook, and don't forget that we also have a website. So make sure you look there for all the wonderful posts about historic sites in Kentucky that I and my daughter and my mother have visited. So make sure you check that out at www.kentuckyhistoric.travels.com. You'll find us in all of those different media sources. Please come back and join us again next time as we move on to discussing, who did I say it would be? I don't even remember now. Madison. I believe we're talking about Madison County next week. Thank you all so very much for joining me. I look forward to bringing you more Kentucky history. Make sure you have happy travels and happy 250th birthday, America. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.